May thy servant Camilla, who wears this crown, be filled by thine abundant grace.
There is a particular kind of silence that falls inside Buckingham Palace when something significant has shifted. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of reckoning. The kind that follows a decision so consequential, so deeply personal, that even those who have spent decades studying the institution find themselves searching for the right words. That silence has been growing louder in recent months, and its source is not a scandal, not a death, not a constitutional crisis. It is something far more intimate. It is the quiet, deliberate reshaping of a monarchy's future, and it is happening in plain sight. King Charles III, a man who spent more than 7 decades waiting for a crown he was born to wear, is making choices that will define not just his reign, but the entire trajectory of the British royal family for generations to come. And those choices, taken together, tell a story that Camilla, Queen Consort, almost certainly did not anticipate when she stood beside her husband at Westminster Abbey in May 2023 and felt the weight of a crown placed upon her head, a crown she had waited for, a crown she had sacrificed her public reputation to eventually claim, a crown that, if the signals emanating from the palace are to be believed, is already being handed, symbolically and systematically, to someone else. That someone else is Catherine, Princess of Wales. And what is unfolding between these two women? One, the reigning queen consort, the other, the future queen, is perhaps the most consequential royal transition since Elizabeth II stepped back and allowed the world to finally accept that the era of Charles had arrived. To understand where we are, we must first understand where this all began. When Charles married Camilla Parker Bowles on April 9, 2005, the ceremony at Windsor Guildhall was a modest affair by royal standards, deliberately so. The British public had not forgiven Camilla for the role she played in the breakdown of Charles's first marriage to Diana, Princess of Wales. The wounds were still open. The flowers left at Kensington Palace gates were still vivid in collective memory, and so Clarence House made a careful, calculated announcement. Upon Charles's accession to the throne, Camilla would not be styled as queen. She would instead be known as Princess Consort. It was a promise designed to soothe, a political concession dressed up as personal humility, but as legal scholars and constitutional historians would later point out, it was also built on sand. There is no established legal mechanism in British constitutional law for the title of Princess Consort. Under the common law framework that has governed British monarchy for centuries, the wife of a king is, by definition, a queen. The announcement from Clarence House was not a legal commitment. It was a public relations gesture, and like many such gestures, it lasted only as long as it was convenient. By the time Charles ascended to the throne following the death of Queen Elizabeth II in September 2022, the political calculus had changed. Time had passed. Camilla had spent 17 years performing public duties, attending engagements, supporting charitable causes, appearing at Charles's side at every official function. The palace made the decision, and Charles confirmed it. The earlier promise was quietly set aside. Camilla would be crowned queen consort, and on May 6, 2023, in one of the most watched ceremonies in modern history, that is precisely what happened. She was anointed. She was crowned. She was enthroned. And yet, even as that ceremony was still unfolding, even as the cameras swept across the grand interior of Westminster Abbey, the narrative was already beginning to complicate itself. Because also present in that abbey, dressed not in a crown or a tiara, but in an embroidered floral headpiece, was Catherine, Princess of Wales. And the choices made around how Catherine was dressed, where she was positioned, what she was permitted to wear, those choices became the first paragraph of a story that the palace perhaps did not intend to write so openly. Charles had made a specific request. No one other than himself and Camilla was to wear a crown or tiara during the coronation. This extended to Catherine and to her daughter, Princess Charlotte. The intention, as royal commentators analyzed at length in the days that followed, was clear. This was Camilla's moment. Charles wanted his wife to stand at the center of the frame, and he was willing to deliberately dim the light of the most popular royal in Britain to make that happen. What Charles perhaps did not fully anticipate was the effect this would have. When you attempt to diminish someone whose public standing is already exceptional, you do not always succeed in diminishing them. Sometimes, you simply draw more attention to the contrast. Catherine, dressed in restrained elegance, carrying herself with the composure she had become known for, managed to capture attention despite the deliberate effort to redirect it. The public noticed, the cameras noticed, and somewhere in the analytical corridors of palace strategy, someone surely made a note. Because within the year that followed, the dynamic began to shift in ways that were too consistent and too deliberate to be accidental. King Charles began, through a series of formal appointments, public gestures, and institutional decisions, to build something around Catherine that had a different quality than what surrounded Camilla. He began to build a legacy. In 2024, King Charles appointed Catherine as Colonel of the Irish Guards. To those outside the world of British royal tradition, this may sound like a bureaucratic title of little consequence. It is not. The role of Colonel of a Guards regiment is one of the most prestigious military appointments within the royal framework. It carries symbolic weight that extends far beyond the ceremonial. It connects the holder to the long history of British military tradition and to the monarchy's role as guardian of the nation. For Catherine to receive this appointment was not routine. It was significant, and royal observers, from established commentators to historians with decades of experience analyzing palace decisions, recognized it immediately as such. On the same day, Charles also appointed Camilla as Grand Master of the Order of the British Empire. Both were significant appointments on paper, but the public response revealed something important about perception. Catherine's military appointment felt connected to history, to the future, to the continuity of the crown's most fundamental traditions. Camilla's ceremonial title, while respected, did not carry the same emotional resonance with the public. Social media captured this distinction instantly. Across platforms, comparisons were drawn, discussions erupted. YouTube channels covering the royal family recorded millions of views within days. The public was reading the signals, and it was drawing its own conclusions. This is the nature of the modern monarchy in the age of social media and instant global commentary. Every appointment, every gesture, every photograph is analyzed, compared, debated, and archived. The palace knows this, and Charles, who has spent his entire adult life studying the mechanics of royal perception, knows it better than most. When he made those two appointments on the same day, he understood exactly what he was doing and what kind of conversation it would generate. The question is not whether the signal was intentional. The question is whether Camilla understood what the signal meant. In January 2026, a publication shook the carefully managed quiet of palace communications. The Times magazine ran a feature on Catherine, Princess of Wales. The headline read, "Arise, Queen Kate." The subheading described a future queen who listens. The piece drew on accounts from palace insiders and those close to Catherine to paint a detailed portrait of how she envisions modernizing the monarchy. It spoke of her priorities, her approach to public engagement, her philosophy of service. The timing was extraordinary. Catherine had recently returned to full public duties following her cancer treatment, and her recovery had transformed public perception of her in ways that no communication strategy could have engineered. She had faced a life-altering diagnosis with a dignity that felt entirely genuine. She had stepped back from public life without drama, protected her children, and then returned, not with fanfare, but with purpose. The public responded to this with something that went beyond approval. It responded with affection. And then the Times placed her on a magazine cover and titled her the future queen. While Charles was still king, while Camilla was still queen consort, the implicit message was impossible to miss. Britain's most prominent newspaper was not simply profiling a popular royal. It was gesturing toward a future that the institution itself seemed to be endorsing. Royal columnist Amanda Patel raised pointed questions in the aftermath. Had the palace approved the interviews? Was this feature coordinated? And critically, was presenting Kate's future reign in such glowing terms, while Camilla was still queen, a deliberate slight against the sitting queen consort? These questions did not receive official answers. The palace maintained its characteristic silence. But as anyone who has spent time studying the British royal institution understands, silence is rarely neutral. Silence in palace circles is itself a form of communication. The polling data that surrounds this story is not trivial. Numbers, in the world of constitutional monarchy, carry a particular kind of weight. A monarchy without public consent is a monarchy on borrowed time, and every institution within the royal household understands this with crystalline clarity. YouGov polling published in the period between 2024 and early 2026 showed approval ratings for the Prince and Princess of Wales sitting at approximately 77% and 74% respectively. These are extraordinary numbers for any public figure in the contemporary media landscape. They reflect not just passing popularity, but deep, durable public trust. King Charles sat in 4th place in the same polling. Queen Camilla sat in 7th. The sitting Queen Consort of England ranked 7th in popularity within her own family. Let that land for a moment. 7th. Below not just her husband and stepson, but below Catherine, below Prince William, below figures who do not hold the position that Camilla currently holds. This is not a small gap in public standing. This is a chasm, and institutions as ancient and adaptable as the British monarchy do not ignore chasms. The palace reflects public sentiment in subtle but unmistakable ways. Who appears on the central balcony during official occasions? Whose appointments receive the most prominent placement in official announcements? Whose image is used when the monarchy needs to speak to the future rather than the past? These are the real elections that take place within royal life. They have no ballot boxes, but they have consequences as real as any democratic outcome. Catherine's rise during this period was not manufactured by palace strategy alone. It was also forged in personal fire. Her cancer diagnosis, revealed publicly in March 2024, was one of the most significant moments in British royal history of the modern era. The manner in which she disclosed it directly, calmly, with a video message that was clearly her own voice, and not a palace script, changed the nature of her relationship with the British public and with global audiences. She was no longer simply a princess. She was a person who had faced something terrifying and chosen to face it with transparency. Her return to public duties was equally powerful. She did not return with an attempt to recapture attention. She returned with focus, selecting causes that mattered to her, engaging with the public in ways that felt personal rather than performative. Her work on early childhood development continued. Her advocacy around mental health deepened. Her cancer research UK patronage took on new personal meaning, and in May 2025, her inclusion in the Time 100 Health list cemented something the polls had already been indicating. She had moved from being one of the most popular royals to being one of the most influential women in the world. This is what Charles has recognized and what he has, through his appointments and his public gestures, chosen to formalize. He is not simply fond of his daughter-in-law. He is a king who understands legacy, who knows that the monarchy's survival depends on public trust, and who sees in Catherine someone capable of securing that trust for the generation that will follow his own reign. He is, in the assessment of multiple royal historians, doing something his mother never fully did for Diana. He is supporting the next Princess of Wales before she needs it. He is preparing the ground. Camilla's position in all of this is one of the more poignant threads running through this story, because what makes her situation so complex is the weight of what she endured to reach the position she currently holds. She survived years of public hostility that would have broken most people. She was vilified in tabloids, condemned in public discourse, held responsible for the collapse of a marriage and the suffering of a woman whom the world adored. She stood beside Charles through all of it, maintained her composure, continued her charitable work, and gradually, incrementally, rebuilt her public image into something that, if not universally beloved, was broadly accepted. Her work combating domestic abuse and sexual violence has been genuine and sustained. Her advocacy through organizations like Safe Lives and her public engagement with survivors has been recognized by those working in that field as meaningful and consistent. She is not a woman without substance. She is not a figure who stumbled accidentally into the role she holds. She earned her position through decades of loyalty and endurance. And yet, the structure of the monarchy does not reward personal endurance in the way that personal endurance perhaps deserves to be rewarded. The monarchy rewards public perception. It rewards the future. And when those two things pointed consistently away from Camilla and toward Catherine, the institution began to adjust accordingly. Reports surfaced in the final months of 2025 and into early 2026, indicating that Camilla had made requests regarding her position and public role following the eventual end of Charles's reign. She had reportedly sought some form of formal acknowledgement of her continued relevance, of a guaranteed role in the public life of the monarchy after William and Catherine assumed the throne. Those requests, according to palace sources, were declined, not harshly, not cruelly, but firmly. The palace's response, translated from the language of institutional diplomacy, was essentially this: the future belongs to those who will carry it, and that is not you. The constitutional reality of what happens when William becomes king is both straightforward and, for Camilla, inescapable. Upon William's accession, Catherine will become queen consort automatically, without need for any additional designation or special ceremony. The title simply transfers, and Camilla's current title, queen consort, will require clarification. Historical precedent points toward the title of queen dowager, a term designating the widow of a king. It is a title with dignity and historical weight, but it is also a title that marks an ending. Queen Elizabeth, the wife of King George VI, navigated a version of this transition when her daughter became Queen Elizabeth II, eventually being styled as Queen Elizabeth the Queen Mother. But that precedent cannot apply to Camilla. She is not the mother of the future king. She has no comparable familial claim to continued royal prominence. She would be Queen Dowager Charles, and the distinction between that title and the title that Catherine will hold would be immediately apparent to every observer, every newspaper, every digital platform covering the royal family. The palace has reportedly communicated, through the understated channels it prefers, that Camilla's public role following Charles's reign will be modest. That decisions about residence and public engagement will be made in accordance with the institution's needs, not according to prior arrangements or personal preferences. For a woman who spent decades simply trying to take her rightful place beside a king, this is an extraordinary reversal. There is something in this story that inevitably circles back to Diana. It always does, in any serious examination of the modern British royal family. Diana's shadow does not diminish. It has been 30 years since her death, and her presence in the architecture of royal public perception remains structurally significant. Charles has spent the majority of his adult life defined, in part, by his relationship to Diana's memory. The public's complicated feelings about him have always been filtered through that prism. Now, in what may be one of the final chapters of his reign, Charles appears to be making a choice that some analysts read as a form of historical correction. He is doing for Catherine what was never done for Diana. He is publicly supporting her, elevating her institutional position, backing her public profile with the formal machinery of royal appointment. He is ensuring that when William